Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this week's Insightful Foundations, a collaboration of Morgan State University, Office of Residence Life, and the University Chapel. We thank you for being with us again. With that said, I introduce to you Reverend Dr. Keels, chaplain of the University Chapel.
Thank you, Dr. Gwen. We have always blessed to be able to explore some of the topics we think that affect the life and understanding of people of color throughout the diaspora. One thing that we've held in common, whether it's in Africa, whether it's in South Carolina, South Baltimore, East Baltimore, wherever you're from, music has been a cornerstone of what we do. I can remember learning so many lessons in life in Alabama through hearing some of the slave songs and the rhythm of the choir in church. And then later on, when we got to high school and thought we were, cool sitting on the corner harmonizing. Y'all remember that? You sit on the corner doo-bopping and didn't realize how bad you sound, but everybody thought they was Smokey. Everybody thought they was somebody like David Ruffin or something like that. Well, we thought that this is a very interesting time in the life of what's happening in Black America and America in general. Nowhere is it more pronounced the musical impact than in the Black community. Whether you're going for the classical traditions of music that happened with university choirs like the Fifth Jubilee Singers, Morgan's great renowned choir, whether you're talking about people who had this incredible ability to just express themselves in music through gospel music. Think of Fannie Mae Crosby and the person who was blind being able to write some of these powerful songs, or Thomas Dorsey. You can go on and on and on. And we thought that it may be good to have a discussion generated today around the topic of music within the diaspora, from jazz to hip hop to all in betweens. And I can think of no one better to do that than someone who I've had the pleasure of knowing for a while. Bruce Henderson is a remarkable musician, a musicologist, an expert at looking at music from the fact that when he was a young person and going Baltimore, but with the, he is a proficient on many instruments, has one of the most amazing tenor voices. I can go on and on, but we see him regularly, and with the Olton Singing Society, which his father founded, and now he is a conductor of. Without any further ado, and being led by your just sharing with us these experiences, Mr. Bruce Henderson. Welcome, Bruce.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's good to be here, and I'm glad that Dr. Keels asked me to come in and talk to you all. This is going to be very informal, and I'm just going to try to go from here to there and ask you all to please feel free. This is interactive and not a lecture, and to feel free about chiming in at whatever time. Let me know if at any point you're not unable to hear me. My connection is usually pretty good, but sometimes it goes out. Okay, so where to start? I had one place I was going to start, but I'm going to change that right now and go ahead. And Rem Keel's talking about my heritage musically, and I thought maybe I'd go ahead and start there instead. I was going to start somewhere else. Because my father was a musician. My mother actually was a musician also. And I grew up in East Baltimore. And so as a Black person, the next thing I'm going to say is my church was, because usually when you're talking with Black folks in Baltimore and around the world, often when we try to identify ourselves, then often the phrase, "and my church was," comes up early in the profile, in the identification of who you are. And I think that's significant. In Baltimore, also, a lot of times the next thing comes up is, and I went to high school at, you know, and you know, and these are the things that are very important in terms of our understanding of who we are, our relationships with life in general, and our relationships with other people. It says things. It talks about your heritage, talks about your sense of pride and what have you. Anyway, so I won't give you my high school was, even though it was Frederick Douglass High School, but I will give you my church was. And we grew up I grew up in the Faith Baptist Church in Baltimore, Maryland, over in East Baltimore on Bond and Ashland Avenue. And my family was a strong family there. In fact, my great uncle was Reverend Simon Williamson, who was a great pastor in the church. He was the pastor who brought that church into its existence. Every church has that golden era pastor that you can always point to in the history of the church, that brought the church from its nascent beginnings to establishing it in its golden era, whenever that is. And then churches live off of that golden era for many years to come afterwards. And so I'm proud to say that my great uncle was a member of that church. And so that's why I was there. And that's where I first encountered music, pretty much, period, other than the music I heard in the mornings at the house that may have been playing on the radio. And in my household, with my father there and the type of person he was, I didn't even hear Motown or anything of that nature until probably I was 8 or 9 years old. But we did hit WBAL. And so I heard everything from Louis Armstrong singing Hello, Dolly, to classical selections and what have you. So most of my musical, origins, roots would trace back to Faith Baptist Church. And Faith Baptist Church was a high-spirited church. And that's another important aspect of it, because we talk about the music of African Americans and how the music in the church influenced our history so much. Yet and still, there were always different churches. You had churches that had different worship styles. Faith Baptist Church at that time was fairly high-spirited Baptist church, perhaps not as high-spirited as the Pentecostal church that was down the block. And that's also significant, but high-spirited in a sense that it maintained that sense of Africanness that we are, I'd like to talk about more as we, talk about this subject. But also, my father was the director of music at the same time, even though Faith Baptist Church was his church. He rarely attended it during the time when I was coming up, because he was the director of music or minister of music. I don't think they called it a minister of music back then. And we're talking about now in the 60s, through, all of the 60s and even through part of the 70s. But he was the minister of music or director of music at Madison Avenue Presbyterian Church, where I also spent Sundays. So I was either at Faith Baptist Church or at Madison Avenue Presbyterian Church. And the worship experiences were opposed in many senses to each other, even though both were Black congregations with a history going way back of being Black. Madison Avenue Presbyterian Church is the oldest Black Presbyterian church in the state of Maryland, and one of the 6 oldest in the country, founded by free and enslaved African Americans coming out of First Presbyterian Church, First in Franklin, I think is what it is now, and in 1842, which predates emancipation. And established this church in Baltimore. Now it's over on Madison Avenue. I'm saying all that to say that, and it goes into my general thrust of the conversation today that I'd like to establish. And that is that my experience was with both sides of this schism that we have in African-American culture sometimes that's overplayed. And this opposition, quote unquote, I give you some air quotes on that, opposition between the house Negro and the field Negro, house culture and field culture. And my experience as I was coming up before it became anything intellectual was a complete exposure and immersing in both aspects of African American, and we'll narrow it down to music at this point in time. And so by the time I realized that there was a problem, I had already come to love and appreciate both expressions. And so my life since then, and this was long before I decided or considered being a musician, so that by the time I did become a musician or interested in music and then become a musician, I had already been kind of grounded in the fact that the whole thing is beautiful and powerful. And then as I learned more and experienced more, I realized that there was an issue and, this between this different types of worship styles and different types of music and what have you. And certain things represented certain value systems, et cetera, in terms of how you worship and what the music was and the value systems that they implied. And you don't do this here and you don't do that there. And I'll get into a few more specifics later. I had already been grounded against that. I had already been shielded against that. And that, I think, is a blessing. And I think within that, there is some great possibilities in terms of what music can do to pull together divergent points of view, especially in the Black community, in terms of what house Negroes mean and what field Negroes mean. And this schism that we've had to deal with for a long time, where I believe that if we can kind of get beyond that and pull together the power of both of them, then therein lies a great deal of empowerment. And I think the music does it often, even though we still suffer from some of the, the same kind of, points of view that can separate the two. So, and, when I looked at the flyer, I saw the whole idea of contemporary. So we're in a time where unification, the idea of unification is once again at the forefront. We've gone through a period where it's been all about schism and isolation. That's been like just all up in the air and the call of the day. America only, keep the immigrants out. Let's make America what it was and great again. I think that, and then of course now with, the election of Biden and what have you, this whole idea of hope for unification again. Let's pull all Americans together. Well, let's talk about that in terms of music, and then let's make it specific in terms of African American music, because let's pull all African Americans together musically. Let's get rid of, if we can, or figure out a way to get rid of that schism of the house Negro versus the field Negro, and understand that there was something going on in both camps, and there was something going on in both camps between camps. It was, I don't, they, you know, I'm not an expert, but I don't think it was always just this complete isolation of one from the other. You see what I'm saying? And they never, ever shared intelligence. And when I say intelligence, I don't mean how smart you are. I mean information about what's going on now and how do you respond and deal and survive in this situation. I think the music, you know, kind of hints to some answers and ways to go about not buying into the hype that we are so different because we come from different social classes within the African American community, all right? Or that we're so different because we have, quote unquote, different value systems. We're so different because we like the concert music a little bit more than we like the jazz. You know, we think that the concert music provides this type of an indication of intelligence and literacy. And the oral music harkens back to some things that we don't really want to discuss. Or now, that's if you're coming from one camp. Now, if you're coming from the other camp, then the concert tradition music represents an attempt to sell out and leave your Blackness. And what we're looking for is a way of satisfying a need for that Africanness that we've been separated from. Okay. And they don't have to be mutually exclusive, in my opinion. And so that's what I wanted to just kind of discuss as you know, in this session today. If I ask you, for instance, not if I ask you, but look, if I mention the name Miles Davis, and then I mention the name Louis Armstrong, then you know, and I'm assuming that you all kind of, Louis Armstrong, we know, great trumpet player at the beginning of jazz. Miles Davis, we know, great trumpet player later on in time. But there were comments made by Miles Davis at one point in time regarding Louis Armstrong. And even though Louis Armstrong is clearly one of the essential creators in the field of jazz, and because he is, he's also one of the essential creators and innovators in the sound of American music. You know, not just jazz, but if you talk about jazz, you're talking about the sound of American music. Okay, and so Louis Armstrong, great trumpet player, brought technical facility to the instrument that hadn't been heard before, even to the point of influencing your quote unquote concert composers in terms of what the instrument can do, how high it can play, how quickly it can play. So they heard that and they said, oh, my goodness, we didn't know that was possible. Let's start writing music, because European concert music is about the composer. Let's start writing music that people can play so that it exploits what we just figured out can happen. Now, that's Louis Armstrong. But at the same time, Miles Davis said, wait a minute, even though I'm sure he respected Louis Armstrong in terms of his abilities on the instrument and his influence in jazz, had a real problem with Louis Armstrong and the mugging and the entertainment and all that came about in Louis Armstrong's career, like sort after the 30s into the 40s and beyond. You know, early in Louis Armstrong's career with the Hot Fives and the Hot Sevens, man, they were making music that hadn't been heard before. Okay, he left New Orleans, went to Chicago, and boom, there it is. But then later on, as it became more and more popular, the criticism was, well, Armstrong is mugging more than he's playing. Do you understand what I'm saying? He's entertaining more than he's playing. He's not pushing the boundaries of the music, but he is making white folks feel comfortable. He's an Uncle Tom. He's a house nigga, okay? And that's where Miles had a problem with Armstrong, okay? He also had a problem, though. Miles had a problem with Dizzy also, because Dizzy did a lot of that too. He had a problem with Dizzy, even though he couldn't, now Dizzy, that's a whole nother story, but that's musician talk. I'm not gonna get into that. But that dichotomy that exists in our culture as we try to determine. Another example would be, you mentioned Thomas, Reverend Keels, you mentioned Thomas A. Dorsey. And his importance in the music. Now, Thomas A. Dorsey, he came out of Georgia. I think he was born in Villa Rica, Georgia, right around 1899 or so. And then he came up. Now, first Thomas Dorsey was musically, the first thing we can talk about, Thomas Dorsey was a music director for Ma Rainey. And I think there's a thing coming out now on Netflix or whatever, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. So I don't know if we're familiar with who Ma Rainey was, but Ma Rainey was a, blues musician, one of those women blues musicians. One of those wild women who don't get the blues musicians. You know what I'm saying? And Ma Rainey was, she was out of Georgia also. She might have been out of Columbus. I said it because my mother was born in Columbus. But anyway, so Ma Rainey was, blues musician Thomas A. Dorsey was her music director. In fact, his name was, I forget what it was, but it was a dirty name. He for a long time traveled with Ma Rainey. Then at a point in his life, he ended up in Chicago. And we know about Thomas A. Dorsey now because of his Precious Lord, Take My Hand, and all the other selections that he wrote. But before that, he was a blues musician. He wrote a hit as a blues musician called It's Tight Like That. And it was about exactly what it sounds like, okay? And then he became the gospel musician that we know. In fact, he's the one who coined the term gospel music. Went to Chicago, and as a part of the migration, from the South to the North, he was a part of that. Went to Chicago. Things happened, and he established himself as a gospel musician. Now, in Chicago at the same time, there was a church, Mount Olivet Pilgrim Church. I can't remember what it was. And that church was a part of that tradition of urban Black churches that were being established in the North, especially, that were grappling with the identity issue. The preachers were attempting to preach in a way that it established Black folks as being intellectually competent, and not off the chain, if you understand what I'm saying, in terms of how they do things. And so they, even the AME Church, right? We know that the AME Church, when it was founded, the founder of AME Church, Payne, I think. Anyway,
Richard Allen.
Richard Allen. Payne was one of like the 5th or 6th bishops or something like that, if I remember correctly. But he was very much, he had a point of view, Payne. That's why I remember him in terms of what should be happening and what should not be happening in the church, musically, especially African-American churches. But so you had the situation where as this first African-American denomination is established, and they tried all they could and to make sure that there were as few references to African roots as possible. Now, I'm speaking quickly, and you can break me down. I know at certain points in terms of the details of the history, but I'm just talking quickly now. And so you had that. So here, Thomas Dorsey's in Chicago, church in Chicago, Pilgrim, Mount Olivet Pilgrim Church. Even though the preachers, and this is in my reading, even though the preachers of the church were somehow starting to try to incorporate some of that high-spirited worship in their delivery, there was still a real schism in terms of what was going to happen musically in the churches. And at this church, you had the influence of people like Nathaniel Dett, Nathaniel Dett, great composer, African-American composer, but more along the lines of very much interested in expressing through the European tradition. Edward Boatner, who came over to the church, who was also very much interested in it. Now, here you have Thomas Dorsey, who comes into the same area, former blues musician, who starts to incorporate the blues aspects of his music, or the sacred text into the blues aspects of his music, and which eventually became gospel. And he's actually given credit for coining the phrase gospel to be applied to the music, not the phrase gospel itself, but to be applied to the music and his career. So you had those two divergent kind of musical approaches right there in the city of Chicago. They were going one against the other. And if I remember the story correctly, in fact, Edward Boatner was at this church in Chicago, the Mount Olivet, when I guess the pastor or preacher of the church decided that he was going to hire Dorsey to come into the church. And when he hired Dorsey to come into the church because of his gospel thing that was going on, that was bringing people in and expressing something musically that they needed. Okay, so this is the migration time and people coming up, and I remember the stories of migration and about country Negroes coming up here and, all that kind of thing, you know what I mean? So here comes, and Boatner quit. He left the church when he brought Dorsey in. This whole thing that we go through is what I'd like to talk about, and how we could possibly reconcile, because the Christian thing is about reconciliation and unification, how we kind of reconcile this thing in a way to, or how can we reconcile this thing, period, boom. My career and my point of view has been about doing that. From when it got to the point that I actually started thinking about, well, what am I doing? What decisions am I making now in terms of the music that I want to be a part of, express, what have you, and why? Okay. At the point that I started thinking about that, I realized that one thing that I'm about is figuring out how to reconcile that, because I believe that the power is in the reconciliation of the two, as opposed to the victory of the one or the other over, or the final victory of the one over the other. And just to digress a little bit, and I know it's true, because when I did get to the conservatory and I was just founding around trying to figure out who I am, I'm gonna tell you, I tell my boy Butch this the other day. Butch is my best friend, but eventually I even told my father, Well, shucks, man. The first day I got to the conservatory for real, I had come up there and visited and did my auditions and what have you. But the first day that I got to the conservatory for real, I was by myself. I had to go in there and figure out and listen to everybody playing. And I heard so much great music for these little kids. I was ready to roll. I was getting ready to put 10 cents in that payphone and call my father and say, look, I don't think we made the right decision. Yeah, I'm ready to come home. I didn't do it because my father's influence is so strong that I knew if I dropped that dime and said that to him, but I guess the point I'm trying to make in regards to that is that whatever, I believe that there's a way to reconcile those two points of view so that we can find the power in that reconciliation through the music. And I think that in certain areas, the music does point the way and allow us to do it if we allow it to do so. As I, to finish the conservatory story, the reason I started, I couldn't remember why I started it, but now I remember, was because when I finally got to the conservatory and I started settling in, and I would go to all of concerts. I would go if I was available. If I wasn't playing or I had to practice or had something going on, because there was like all kinds of concerts going on right in that conservatory all the time and throughout Boston. And I would go to them all. I don't care whether it was a jazz concert, whether it was a progressive jazz concert, whether it was a concert about madrigals and medieval music, or whether it was a concert, et cetera, yada, yada, yada. And eventually I was approached by one of the legendary teachers at the conservatory. His name was Rand Blake. He says, man, you're one of the new students here. I guess I'd been there several months. He says, but every time I come to a concert, you're there. You're at all of the different concerts. He says, so I want you to be a part of what I do, because what he was the director of what came to be called the Third Stream Department. And the Third Stream Department was a combination of European music, Black American music. One stream is European, one stream is Black American. The third stream is the combination of the two. And he says, I want you to be a part of what I'm doing here, and I did. I became a part of it. And that kind of, just kind of confirmed it, because I wasn't doing it to make a point. I was just doing it. And he came up and said, hey, look, I noticed that you're doing this. I said, wow, okay. And that was a way of establishing an identity for me that helped, given that call I wanted to make several months before. I no longer felt like so out of place, in other words, So that's the thing. How do we reconcile that? The house Negro concept versus the field Negro concept. And then I'm gonna stop after this. And then the other underlying thing is this separation between sacred and secular. That's another thing that we have to figure out to reconcile, because the African tradition is there is no difference between sacred and secular, and that's part that God is expressed in every aspect of life, whereas the European concept says no, there is a separation. So not only is it just a matter of style in terms of those things that are African and those things that are European, but it's also a point of view in terms of how do we even approach the concept of God, and can it, and the fact that in the African experience it exists in everything you do. That's expressed through the music. So that's kind of a long preamble to what I thought would be, and has been on my mind, has always been on my mind. Excuse me.
It's very interesting when you talk about this duality of the house Negro and the field Negro and the secular and the sacred. One of the unique things about Black music that I've noticed throughout the years is the way in which the phrasing comes out in certain music. I don't want to put you on the spot, but when you hear and see yourself not separating it in the African tradition from the sacred and the secular, how is it that we have things like the blue notes where people bend a note, or the phraseology of singing? Tell a little bit about that, because it's not like the European composer where it's an exact rendition of a note and a scale, but for instance, in African music, and I'm sure Dr. Olawabi would be able to back this up as well. You have this real individualized treatment of music. And I notice that when I hear you, sometimes I hear that coming out, both the secular and the sacred. Does that make sense when I'm asking?
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense to me. And I think it's a good question. And so, forgive me, as a musician, I'll approach from that. Let's start with the phrasing. You said something, I wrote that down so I can remember. The use of phrasing. And part of the African tradition requires that if you are singing about something, then you have to do everything that you can to communicate that. You have to be sure that you get beyond technique. You need to communicate with every aspect of what you have, that idea or concept. And to me, that's what goes to phrasing. Because in phrasing, you're talking about whether I'm going to sing a note loud or soft, whether I'm going to cut it short, how much space I'm going to have between words, what is the character of my voice? Is it going to be a rough sound, or is it going to be a purer sound? Right? If I decide that we're moving through a piece of music and we're getting to the climax of the phrase, how do I emotionally let the people who are listening know and feel the same climatic thing that I'm trying to express? That's very African. I've read stories and I've even had an opportunity to talk with some African musicians in terms of how important that is. So if I'm growling and it's for a reason, because I'm trying to get a certain point across. Cat told me one time, African cat told me that sometimes, I don't know, people tell me stuff, I'll just go, I'll take it. And he says, if we are singing about confusion, the concept of confusion, if something's confused, then what we'll try to do is tie our tongues in a knot so that we can not be able to speak clearly because it's confusion. Confusion along the same lines as the Babel confusion, I guess, you know what I mean, from a Christian standpoint, that we don't want it clear. So we will even try to tie our tongues in a knot. Okay? And so that's what phrasing is, and that's what we do. That's what we do. We don't just do it as musicians. We just do that.
Would it be too much to ask you, for example, like something like Precious Lord or something like that?
Yeah.
How would that appear to be sung in the Black tradition and then also the European edition? I'm trying to edge you on so that people can hear your musicianship in it as well. When you sing, it's oftentimes I get the impact that you really are adding uniqueness to the music that's being produced, where the straightforward precious Lord, take my hand may bend and slide and all the other things that go into it. Where does that come from?
It comes from a similar place. There's a difference between the African tradition of approaching music and the European tradition of approaching music. I mentioned the word composer before, and one kind of gross generalization is that, in the African American music tradition, in the African music tradition, it's the performer that is primary. In the European concert music tradition, it is the composer that is primary. And so if you have the composer that's primary, then he's the dictator now. So whatever it is that he writes, you have to play. Now, you do have some leeway in terms of trying to interpret what the composer may have wanted. Just like if you're reading a book, as two actors are going to read the book and they won't read it in the same way because they feel that the interpretation requires this. But at the same time, he doesn't have the freedom to change the words or to, to change the actual text. In African American music or African music, you do have the option to even change text, or in this case, let's not say text in terms of the words, but let's say just in terms of the melody itself. I can change the melody if I want to, because I want to be able to express myself in a way, and this is how I feel. It's about internalizing what it is that you're expressing.
Can we hear an example?
I know
I'm edging on.
I know you are. I've been dodging you for about 10 minutes.
Yeah, I know. We've been going back and forth.
No, but I think it's important. I'm not in good voice right now, but there are ways to express. Okay. And I've been last night I was recording. I've been doing a lot of recording, and you go over phrases over and over again just to kind of find what it is that you want to say. So if you say, "Precious Lord," so the words of "Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. I'm weak, I'm tired, I'm weak, I'm worn." All right, and so you have to figure out a way to get that across. And each person may have different words that they feel that are, important in that phrase. So if you say, and it gets down to this, even though it's not so clinical as this. So you say, well, if I sing "Precious Lord," how am I going to sing "Precious Lord"? So am I going to say, well, it's "Precious Lord," and now I'm thinking more about Lord, right? Or if I say "Precious Lord," now I'm talking about the fact that he's precious. Okay. And it's the fact that he's precious that I want you to understand, because I'm more interested in you understanding that characteristic of the Lord rather than a more general idea of he's being the Lord. Mm-hmm. You dig what I'm saying? So I'll say, well, "Precious Lord." Sorry. I thought I'd turn that off. "Precious Lord." Okay. Now, second phrase is what? Take my hand. Do I want to say "take my hand"? Because if I say "take my hand," it's because I'm out of control, and I need to just turn it all over to you. Or do I say "take my hand," which means it's not quite as, it's about leading. Each one is about leading, but the first one is just "take my hand." I don't have anything to say about this. The other one is, "Lord, I think I'm trying to get to a place, but I need you to take my hand."
Yeah.
All right. So if I say "take my hand," that means I'm out of control and I don't know what I'm doing. So you need to just come in here and snatch me up before I just go completely crazy. Or you say, "Take my hand." That means I said "my." So that means that there are a lot of options you may have, Lord, but right now I need you to look in my direction. Or I can say, "Take my hand," which means I'm moving in a particular direction, Lord, and I need you to guide me. Okay? And it's that kind of experiencing or expression that goes through people's, and that's, if you ask me about me personally, that's what goes through my mind. So if I'm standing up, because it doesn't take that long for those things to go through your mind. So if I'm standing up and singing, that I'm internalizing, how is it that I feel right now about that? You know, the other thing about it, in terms of the African American experience and the concept of improvisation, is that you are not just singing for yourself, you are relating to whomever it is that is listening to you. And so you are sometimes maybe not singing, that Take My Hand might not have been for me at all, even though it's always about my experience. But it might have been because I see something out here.
Yes.
Or I'm trying to connect with somebody out here. And if I say it this way, because maybe I see somebody that looks this particular, same thing that you do. If I see something over there, then maybe there's a way that I can just connect, you know, and then you move on, because you don't know whether you connected or not. I don't need an amen or hallelujah to know that I connected. I give it a shot and then I move on. Maybe it worked. Maybe I got it. Maybe I didn't. Yes.
I'm always fascinated by the tonal inflection of language and the use of language that we have. You know, I talked with a student, I guess it was last year, and, you know, saying, how is it that we can say, you know, back in the day, it's a bad haircut, a bad coat you got, and actually mean that it's good. And again, that comes from the whole idea of tonal inflection in language as being polysyllabic, as opposed to, in the composer's sense, sometimes in European tradition, is monosyllabic. That each word has this thing. Like if you look at a Ma Rainey and you look at a Black preacher, you could be talking one way and change the inflection of your voice to mean something completely different. And we do that in step shows. We do that in musical bands, in choirs, all kinds of things. And it's uniqueness that we have that allow us back in slavery times, I tell people in my course, to teach the issue of Hush Harbor, for instance, when they were praying to go have a camp meeting down by the river, and Master wouldn't know what they were praying about, but the way in which they sang it gave them indication of where they were going to meet. That's what's really unique. I know we're running close to time, but anybody have any questions you want to?
Can I make a comment? Can I make a comment on that real quick? And I see Warren has got his hand. Let me make a comment on that real quick. In terms of what you just said, and let me just go to this. African languages are based upon relationships between pitches, as I understand it. I'm not an expert. I did get an opportunity to talk with Nkete and Francis Bebe and a few others who gave me some information about that, and I've done some reading. So I know that certain African languages, and they're not the only ones, are based upon relationships between pitches. What I'm saying is this, is that as you learn to speak certain African languages, the relationship between the pitches will change the meaning of a word. Now, in other words, so if I'm speaking in English and I say, you need to stop what you're doing, and then I can say it like that, and I say, you need to stop what you're doing, which means something a little different. And I can say, you need to stop what you're doing, which means different. But yet, still, the word stop still means the same thing. You're just kind of giving it. Whereas in African languages, if you change the inflection and what's called the tonation of the language, then you have actually changed the meaning of the word. And then I'm just anecdotally, and I spent a year in Africa, and so they decided to put me on let's put the American, on blast. So they taught me an African song. I was over in the Ivory Coast, and they taught me a song in the language of Wobe, and they taught it to me phonetically because I didn't know what I was singing, and because they wanted me to sing it as a part of the show so they can see the crazy Americans trying to sing African. So I said, okay, I'll do it. So the phonetics were Aze, Adyao, Yang Munde, Aze. That was what I had to sing. So I was practicing it at the house with the group, and a number of people there. The mother of the director of the company was there, and she had come down from the village, and she was sitting there just as nice and proper and listening to me, and she was from the village in Ma, and she just starts laughing. She just goes, she's trying to be proper, but she just can't contain herself, because even though my phonetics, the whatever you call that, my syllabalizing of the word was close, my tonal thing was off. So because my tonal thing was off, I was saying something that was probably totally different than what the thing was supposed to mean. Well, we have carried that forward. So yeah, that whole idea of tonalization in African music, and that being an important. Now, and I'm done. Consider the fact that you grow up learning to discern those nuances in tonality. Okay, so you're going to hear that a lot differently than I'm going to hear it if I didn't grow up with that. Mm-hmm. So when they say all Black people can do music, all Black people got rhythm, well, to some extent, that's because from the beginning, you were taught to speak musically. Your speaking was musical, and you had to maintain the integrity of your speaking, your musical understanding. You see what I'm saying? So,
yes, sir. Yeah. Mara, you had your hand up before.
Well, I didn't want to shift the conversation too much, but I was interested in Bruce when he mentioned reconciliation and trying to reconcile all of this. And I was looking at a quote from the Presbyterian hymnal, which Melba Costin, chaired.
I know Melba.
And this struck me. They said the two major subcommittees, music and text, separately reviewed each suggested hymn, made revisions when needed to comply with the guidelines, and brought recommendations to the committee. Then, they go on over here to say that, let me find it, every recommended hymn was sung through in its entirety before a vote was taken. And I thought that was interesting that they would, take that kind of deliberate action in order to choose, various hymns and how they were presented. Then I thought this was interesting too. The aim of the committee was to provide a book for singing that with the expectation that all who use it may be enriched by hymns from gospel, evangelical, reform, racial, and ethnic traditions in the church. So, that's a pretty awesome task to take on. And when you talk about reconciling and so on. That just fascinated me that they took that kind of engagement, looking at all those different varieties. And then my last point is they also refused to put some hymns in the church, in the hymnal, two of which were ones I don't sing either, on the Old Rugged Cross, which when I was growing up in the South was considered the Klan hymnal. The Klan national anthem. So the Presbyterians took that out of the hymn book, and they also took out Onward Christian Soldiers, which I don't like. So I just wanted to mention that to you and see what your response might be.
So you said this is the thing, that's something that Melba had written. And when I say Melba, I'm not dropping names, but I do know Melba, and I've spent time with Melba.
Well, she was the chairperson.
Do you know about when that? I'm just kind of a little curious about when that was. It's not important.
Yeah, this was 1986, I believe.
Okay,
is the date that's given here.
Okay, yeah. No, I think that is I do know Melva, and we have, because she's Presbyterian, and we used to have a National Black NBPC, National Black Presbyterian Conference, and we would travel around. And I met her, and in fact, we spent a couple of weeks together in Kingston, Jamaica, and in a conference of sorts. And so, no, I think that these are the types of initiatives and types of efforts that have to be conscious and efforts made by conscious and informed, committed people to because to say something like, for Melva to say something like that and to be a part of that movement is important as we move through. I mean, my mind is going in several different directions. I'm not sure exactly where I want to approach it in terms of the hymns and how that works. When we went to Kingston, and we spent time living together, actually in someone's home. They offered our homes, and they had, a beautiful home. I had met with Melva, and I took a book with me because I knew that she would be there. And it was a book that I had written about 50 scores or more on the music of Donald Lawrence. And I wanted to show it to Melva because I know that she is a reading literate musician. And I wanted her to see that as a part of that whole thing of reconciliation and bringing things together. The Presbyterian tradition, sometimes when it comes to gospel music, is it could be, and not just a little misinformed in terms of what the oral tradition really means. And so I brought it down there so that we could talk about it. And she was very, very open to it. She took the book, and I'm talking about, I have the book here, I'm not going to get it, but this book is about this thick with scores. And she took it and went through it, and we had a discussion about it. And it was a positive discussion, about that. So yes, I think that that's important because hymns is another thing about, in terms of how we as African Americans deal with them. We take a hymn and we'll change the hymn in a minute, and we won't change the hymn in terms of the melody or anything else, but it's something about the feel of that hymn, that changes, when African Americans get a hold of it. And then there's a canon of hymns that have kind of established themselves in African American cross-denominational African American tradition for various reasons. Hymns that talk about Jesus are big, you know what I mean? And I'm not trying to be flip, but that's, and then other hymns that kind of express that kind of thing. So my thing is, like I said, when I was at Madison listening to the hymns and the anthems that my father did, he did hymns and anthems and spirituals, pretty much. My father came from a tradition where he was trained by Edward Boatner. He was trained by Hall Johnson. He was a part of the Harry T. Burley tradition and all of that. Okay, so that's what he did. So I developed a love for that and a sound for that, a sensitive sound for that, going to Madison and listening to that, and then going back to Faith Baptist Church, where those deacons were there, and Glenn Finney and the rest of them were there, and we, that was my experience there. I said Glenn Finney, no, you all don't know, but Miss Price knows who Glenn Finney is. He's a close friend of mine with the same age, and they're together at church over in East Baltimore, and Mount Pleasant, and so. But that's where my aunts were and the old deacons were, and that's where the senior choir number 1, the senior choir number 2, and the gospel choir. And so all of that was a part of my experience, and I thought all of it was great. So yes, to hear that, I just want to be able to now, and even with the radio show that we're doing at the chapel, I'm trying to do all of the music.
You do well.
I'm going to, we'll do anthems. And it all depends upon our resources, but as best as we can, we'll do anthems, we'll do gospel, we'll do spirituals, we'll do jazz, we'll do blues. I'm talking about the styles of music. I'm not talking about necessarily singing about certain subject matter that's inappropriate, but in terms of the styles of music, we're going to go through all of that. I'd like to. That's the vision.
Brother Henderson, I'd like to thank you for your very insightful presentation. We have reached our time, but what I would like to do is if anyone has any quick questions you would like to ask our brother scholar on this call, we'll take maybe two questions, and then we'll ask Brother Howes to give our appreciation to Brother Henderson and end the program.
I'm so much intrigued about the lyrics of the song, which is the most important thing. And when you are really talking about the song "Precious Lord, Take My Hand," I now understand that it depends on how you internalize it. But when we look at the original composer of the song,
yes,
and it has notes, it has some syllable, it has some maybe if maybe one quarter note, it should be have a whole note that they will stress. So, but now when there are some music, they sing a cappella. That is not going by the note that the original composer has already written. So can you talk much more about that? Is it now different from the way the original composer wanted it?
Yeah, I was looking here. I have, I don't want to look for it now. I don't have it up and ready, but I do have a copy of a score that Thomas A. Dorsey wrote for Precious Lord. And just a sidebar, Thomas A. Dorsey was the first person to publish in written form gospel music. And the score is written in such a way that it tries to express how the song should be written in terms of the notes, the note values, quarter notes, eighth notes, and what have you. But it also leaves room for interpretation. So that you should learn, and I tell folks that I'm sing with me, learn the melody. You should learn the melody. And then you have the opportunity of interpreting the melody, even changing some notes and what have you, to express it in such a way that fits your voice and what it is that you want to say or communicate with the music. So yes, it is written down, and it is written down in a very clear way, and you have to honor that. Otherwise, you wouldn't know what the song was. But at the same time, but as you said, the text is also very important. How many times have we changed melodies and applied them to different texts? But yet and still that, yeah, that is important. And there well, I know we lost for time, but there are several examples of music where there are text changes, where the melody is totally different. We did Come Thou Almighty King, and the other day. And the original hymn is, Come Thou Almighty King, help us, help us, Father all glorious, all victorious, come and reign over us. That's how we sing it. But there's another version by Timothy Wright, Come Thou Almighty King, help us thy name to sing, that kind of thing. So which has changed the entire sound of the music, but has maintained the lyrics. So you do maintain the meaning of the thing, but it's a different effect. Mm-hmm.
Well, what a wonderful discussion we've had here today. And Bruce, as always, you've educated us each time I've had the honor of hearing you at chapel, you do a wonderful job of bringing um, understanding to the music which is being performed, and we certainly appreciate what you've done, here today. I
Thank you.
feel like a musical, I don't know what you should call it, but my mother was a member of Faith Baptist Church, and
Oh,
when during the 40s, and I had members of the family who were members of Knox Presbyterian Church, all in that same community. And I was baptized, christened at St. Francis Xavier Catholic Church.
right on Caroline Street.
Right. And we don't know how that happened. But, and then I grew up in a Presbyterian church in South Carolina. So I can certainly understand all these different varieties of music that you speak of. And I appreciate so much your sharing all of this information with us. I'd like to close by thanking you. And for our closing prayer, I'll just read the words to an old African American spiritual for our departing time. So let us pray. I want Jesus to walk with me, to walk with me. I want Jesus to walk with me all along my pilgrim journey, all along our pilgrim journey. Lord, I want you to walk with us. In my trials, Lord, walk with us. In our trials, Lord, walk with us. When my heart is almost breaking, Lord, I want Jesus to walk with me. When I'm in trouble, Lord, walk with me. When I'm in trouble, Lord, walk with me. When my head is bowed down in sorrow, Lord, I want you to walk with me. May the Lord walk with us all along this pilgrim journey and bless every person who is in this platform and all the lives that we touch. We ask these prayers in the name of our Almighty Father. Amen.
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 I'd like to just thank you all for having me, and hope to be in contact with you all again. Brother Wayman, good to see you. It's
God
been a
bless.
minute. I
Good to see
appreciate your
you.
emails. I didn't ignore them. I appreciate what you sent, man. Thank you so much. We all gonna make this thing happen real nice.